Unfortunately, we live at a time when we see that great inspiring historical figures and icons have often been appropriated, and in that process of appropriation have also been falsified by diverse political groups across the spectrum and the irrespective of color. For instance, uh, recently during the elections in West Bengal, we witnessed the way Mr. Amit Shah once told us that he was a great admirer of Rabindranath Tagore and Swami Vivekananda, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and Mr. Narendra Modi also sought to narrate the same story. And when it happens, you really do not know whether you cry or you laugh, you know. Uh, and what is interesting is that, particularly if you refer to West Bengal particularly, then you see that this game of appropriation of great 19th century and the 20th century Bengali Renaissance figures, all political parties, left, right, center, have been trying to continually appropriate it. And at times, this appropriation looked absolutely dramaturgical, ridiculous, and absurd merely for the instrumental political gain. When a rightist organization like the BJP seeks to appropriate Netaji or refers to Subhash Chandra Bose, it's a very crude, instrumental, Machiavellian political game. And I have no hesitation in saying its primary urge is not to learn anything deep or substantial from Subhash Bose. You and I might have certain disagreement with Subhash Bose's ways of looking at the freedom question. But what one cannot deny is that, his boundless patriotism, his courage, his intensity, his scholarship, and his honesty. Now, what BJP is trying to do in the name of referring to Swami Vivekananda, now it is essentially what they are trying to convey is that they are trying to project Subhash Bose as someone opposed to Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru. Their hatred for Gandhi and Nehru was the primary motive for talking about Netaji. But it is a very stupid thing because the relationship between Subhash Bose and Gandhiji and Nehru was much more nuanced, layered, full of differences at times, and full of love, admiration, and respect. And BJP seeks to project that as if Nehru-Gandhi alliance betrayed Subhash Bose, and Subhash Bose was marginalized, and now it is the BJP that would try to rectify that great historical mistake. And this, I think, an organization, their founding organization, RSS, which has got nothing to do with the struggle of freedom, with the freedom struggle. Every year, on 2nd October or 30th January, when you see that a bunch of absolutely corrupt politicians, they would go and they would speak of Gandhi, it's like it looks that everything is its opposite, and it's just a drama. And that's why we are really confused that the politics that we are seeing, and especially today, politics has become optics, politics has become so dramaturgical and the visual. So we really do not know whether on 26th January and then Netaji's thing at the India Gate, and is it Netaji or is it the Messiah of the nation today, so-called Messiah of the nation, who is seen to be more real than the real, So that's a question that young journalists like you would probe into and ask. A lot of Bengali history of Netaji was also lopsided, and it was more like based on certain kind of, subnational identity and certain kind of uncritical hero worshipping. Because in the process of growing up, you realize that Netaji, despite his tremendous intellectual sharpness, honesty, and patriotism, and the way he was influenced by Swami Vivekananda's patriotism, his zeal, his idealism, and the way his brilliance, but at the same time his courage, especially his thinking that a certain kind of alliance with the Nazi or the fascist forces, would essentially help Indian freedom struggle to fight the British and taking that opportunity of the World War II. That, I believe, was absolutely lopsided, and that made me think that critical of that stand, and at the same time, as you grow up, I also realized that when you were young and very instinctively, you tend to feel as if that violent breakthrough would lead to revolution, but the countries which have seen large-scale violence in the world, and also some of the violent revolutions and its repercussion we have seen, from what happened after in the name of cultural revolution in China, what happened in Stalinist concentration camps, what Vietnam passed through and experienced. And in a country like ours, where Gandhi's genius lies was that for more than 3 decades, he could carry on and continue a movement with a great rainbow platform involving different sections of society, from women to the peasants, to the villagers, to the urban citizen, and to a largely non-violent movement. And I think as a result, our freedom movement could sustain itself, and slowly after Gandhi's arrival could become a largely pan-Indian movement, the people's movement. It would no longer remain a movement of the lawyers and the petitioners. So I think that Netaji's heroism, Netaji's patriotism was absolutely admirable. His scholarship was absolutely admirable. But his idea that through Azad Hind Fauj and through certain kind of help from the fascist Nazi forces, he could defeat the thing, that I believe was not correct, was, according to me, lopsided. So I see Netaji with a lot of respect, and at the same time, I also have no hesitation in seeing the limitations of his strategy also. And as a result, as at the very beginning, I would say that as a keen observer of Indian social life, and essentially as a pluralist, I would like to see that all these different schools, currents in our freedom struggle, all have played their own specific roles. And our heart has to be somewhat open. And just we need not think that simply because someone likes Netaji, someone has to hate Gandhi, or someone likes Gandhi and one has to dislike Bhagat Singh. I believe that the process of growing up and the process of learning and clearance and the clarity of vision is that how now, with a more wisdom and intellectual clarity, you could see that in a large country with so much plurality and differences, how all these different branches of freedom movement led to a process of decolonization. And ironically, in that, be it Bhagat Singh's movement, be it Netaji, be it Gandhi, in what was ironic was that the absence of these Hindu nationalists, Also for this time, if we see the 1937 Savarkar's speech in the Hindu Mahasabha presidential address, and then for this Muhammad Ali Jinnah's speech in Karachi or in Lahore or Karachi Minto Park, Pakistan resolution. And when you read these two speeches, you see the structure of the speech is essentially the same. Both Savarkar and Jinnah are talking about two-nation theory. Savarkar is saying that Hindus and Muslims, they are completely different. And if Muslims stay in India, it is not their holy land, it is not their fatherland, and they can stay only as secondary citizen. And Jinnah is saying that these are two different nations, Hindus and Muslims, and in an integrated India, Muslims would not find their dignity. So we need a separate homeland for the Muslims. And both of them were equally critical of Indian National Congress and Gandhiji. And they were saying that Gandhi's idea of cultural pluralism, syncretism, this is absurd. This non-violence is absurd and meaningless. So you could see that on the one hand, people like Jinnah and Savarkar with such propagation of two-nation theory. And when we read Sadat Hasan Manto's stories, path-breaking partition stories, we realize that what this partition led to, that what happened in Punjab, what happened in Bengal, what this led to. And today, are we trying to repeat the same story? What people have passed through led to. So I think that is where today what is happening and the way Hindu nationalists are doing it today, and this kind of an appropriation. They talk about Ambedkar today, they talk about Bhagat Singh today, they talk about Vivekanand today, and all these, I believe, is silly. And they talk about Rabindranath, they talk about almost everybody, and which is so silly and absurd, and which is an insult to the ideals of those people. And even now, you did not be surprised if you find Bengalis in Bengal who like to believe that Netaji is still alive. Maybe he is a saint somewhere in some temple, meditating in some cave or something like that. As children, we used to hear these stories. I remember we also heard a story when we were at school that when Jawaharlal Nehru died, in 60s, and say that just a sadhu came there, and sadhu in a very, very Bengali language said that Johor tuyo chole gali, Johor, you too left us. And Bengalis are saying that was Netaji. And nobody, so all sorts of stories, and Bengalis like to believe that Netaji didn't die, Netaji was alive. So I don't know. But I tend to believe that there is, when you grow up and see beyond this politics, politics of history, writing, then I think, and see beyond, and then you see that whether or not he died in the plane crash at that time, but the fact is that he is no more. He is no more. And how you and I, instead of eternally probing and trying to find some conspiracy into his death with certain kind of a conspiracy theory, it won't possibly take us anywhere. Except fulfilling some of her political wishes and political Machiavellianism. What is important is that how we see death of a person like that, what is important is that Netaji was not just a physical body. You and I, without physical body, would die. But Netaji was a spirit. Netaji was selflessness. Netaji was love. Netaji was great patriotism, great intellectual honesty. And I believe what is most important to ask is that whether this spirit is alive. It's not such an important question to ask whether his body is alive. what is most important. And that is a question a corrupt society like ours does not acquire the courage to ask, that whether that is alive. So, and I think that is the most important question I tend to believe ask.